All right. Here is the last section of chapter 4, which contains the most useful information. What we had up to now was theory. There was some introspection if you did the common tendencies in perception the way I asked you to, and now the last thing we're going to do is, okay, how can you, as they say, synchronize your perceptions? How can you make sure that, or maybe make sure is, how can you help ensure that you and the person you're interacting with are on the same page? So the very first one is, I I believe this is one of the most useful practical skills that you can gain from this entire book, and it's called perception checking. It has 3 parts. Describe the behavior you noticed, consider at least 2 possible interpretations of the behavior, and then request clarification. Now, I will tell you that when we do this, it frequently sounds very stilted because we don't talk like this. So, um, sometimes what you can do is you can go with just a single interpretation. You could do a request for clarification on how to interpret the behavior. So let's look at this, and I'll show you how it works. One of your classmates sits by you every day in class, and you've done a lot of homework together. He's called you at home a few times a week. He suggests that you meet for dinner this weekend. All right, now I'm seeing this from a heterosexual point of view, and I'm assuming I'm in the class. So my assumption, my first, my take on the situation is, oh, this is a date. He's asking me out on a date. And so probably I wouldn't check, right? I would just say, oh, sorry, can't. And then it would be all weird between us. But what about to do the full perception check would sound something like, let's call this person Joey. Hi, Joey, you want to meet for dinner this weekend, and I'm not sure if we're going out to discuss classwork or if this is a date. What's going on? You might say, well, I don't talk like that. So how could you do this in the way that you would actually, this is how you would speak. You might say, Joey, you asked me out for dinner, and I'm wondering if is this a date? So you've given one possible interpretation, and that interpretation was set up in such a way so that it's actually a request for clarification. But way too often we assume that we know exactly what's going on, what the other person intended. And so many times we're wrong, but we don't take the time to check to see if our perception is right. So I uploaded a shortened perception checking exercise 4.3 perception checking, and there are 4 scenarios. And I'd really like you to look at these scenarios and figure out how would you go. I mean, first of all, what's your assumption? Then say, okay, how could I check to see if this assumption is correct? Now, in just a minute, I'm going to tell you a little bit more about the work of Dr. Brené Brown. She has 2, possibly 3 TED Talks. You should check into her. She has some good things. But, excuse me, she likes the way to start this when, hey, Joey, you asked me out to dinner. And then she says, the story I'm making up is... And she does this with big issues. She said she came home, her husband came home once and immediately started making himself a peanut butter and jelly sandwich. And she assumed that he felt that, and she says she's not a great cook and she's not really great at time management. And so she figured that he was just disgusted, that, she can't even, she doesn't do what it takes, doesn't do what she needs to do to make sure that there's food on the table. He's a doctor when she gets home. So she'd say, Steve, the story I'm making up is that you think I'm a terrible housekeeper and I don't pay enough attention to you. And, that gives him the opportunity to say, no, not at all. I know you've been working hard and I'm super hungry, so I thought it would be easier if I'd had a quick snack and then we could make dinner together. Okay, so she doesn't describe the behavior, but she says, the story I'm making up is, so she that's the last two. She's considering an interpretation and she's double checking. Okay, and she's got a whole stack, that's the wrong word. She's got 11 of them besides the story I'm making up. One of the things you can say in a situation is, I'm curious about, or tell me more about. Now, I mean, someone's asked you out for dinner, you don't say, so tell me more about this dinner invitation. But in other situations, there are expressions that you can use. So, what I'm going to do is I will actually post this under exercises and videos for you to see some of the other ways that you might be able to do perception checking. So this is not in our textbook, but this was in a previous textbook. I think this is fascinating because this was developed by school children in Japan. And they call it the pillow method because they're thinking about where you put your head on the pillow. The top, the bottom, the left, the right, the middle. So let's take this scenario. Husband and wife, and their child is going to be starting school. And the husband says, little Jimmy should go to public school because should go to private school because I went to private school and I had a great education. And wife says, little Jimmy should go to public school because I went to public school and I had a great education. Now you can see that this is probably going to cause some friction in the family. So this, I would say maybe the first couple of times you try this would be really challenging, but if you were to go to couples counseling or family counseling, they would take you through something like this. So we always start at position one. I'm right, you're wrong. So I say, no, I'll play the role of the wife. Jimmy should go to public schools, and there's no discussion about this. All right, so then the therapist or my inner voice says to me, okay, Marguerite, let's do this. And I'd say, okay, hon, I can see that you feel this is an important issue and there are so many advantages in a private school that Jimmy wouldn't get at a public school. So I'm not just saying this to say it. I'm actually trying to think about his point of view. I could go to position three. We are both right and we are both wrong. And maybe you would say we are both right to be so concerned about the education our son's going to get, but we are wrong to make this a big issue and to argue in front of Jimmy. Okay. Position four. The issue isn't important. In the grand scheme of things, little Jimmy is going to get an education, and as long as we support him and we let him know how important learning is, that's the important issue. And then position five is, there is truth in all perspectives. I am right about going to a public school because it's going to save us money. You are right about sending him to a private school because, let's say, classes will be smaller. I don't know, never went to a private school. Yeah, we're both right that education is important. We're both wrong that this is such an issue that we should actually fight over it and slam doors. Yes, the issue isn't important because there are ways that no matter what we choose, we will be able to work with it. I really like this, but knowing how the general public is, I think for this to work, there probably needs to be someone to mediate this. So that's my 2 cents on that one. Okay. In order to really synchronize your perception with someone else's, you need to develop empathy. So people confuse empathy and sympathy, but basically empathy is the ability to experience the world from another person's point of view. To what do they say? Before you criticize someone, walk a mile in their shoes. You don't know what someone else is going through. And so there are these 3 components that go into it. Perspective taking. Can you put yourself in someone else's perspective? Emotional contagion, which is catching someone else's emotion. Now, we've all experienced this. You're in a good mood, a friend comes over and they're in a bad mood, and they just bring you right down. It's my husband's phone dinging. Okay. And then genuine concern is you need, for this to work, you have to be the kind of person who really cares about other people. If you are completely self-absorbed, empathy doesn't work. I have put up in the exercises and videos section of this lecture a short illustrations, little video. Brene Brown gave a talk about empathy and sympathy in London, and somebody drew the pictures of it. It's very funny. It's also right on target, but I'm rereading one of her books called Dare to Lead, and she's talking about an empathy skill, and it says to see the world as others see it, or perspective taking. Okay, so listen to this. We see the world through a set of unique lenses that bring together who we are, where we come from, and our vast experiences. Our lenses certainly include factors like age, race, ethnicity, ability, and spiritual beliefs, but we also have other lenses that shape how we see the world, including our knowledge, insights, and experience. Our take on the world is completely unique because our point of view is the product of our history and experiences. This is why 10 people can witness the same incident and have 10 different perspectives on what happened, how it happened, and why it happened. Are there any observable, knowable, universal truths? Of course, math and science have given us many examples, but when it comes to the swirl of human emotions, behavior, language, and cognition, there are many valid perspectives. And this is the really key part. One of the signature mistakes with empathy is that we believe we can take our lenses off and look through the lenses of someone else. We can't. Our lenses are soldered to who we are. What we can do, however, this is a key point, is honor people's perspectives as truth, even when they're different from ours. Okay? Let me say that again. What we can do is honor people's perspectives as truth, even when they're different from ours. So basically what happens is we are convinced that my truth is the truth. And it's hard to take a step back and say to the other person, I think part of it is I'm going to listen to you, and we'll talk about how to do that in chapter 7. I'm going to listen to you. I'm going to hear you, and I'm going to listen to you, and then I'm going to say that even though my experience is different, I will admit that your experience is valid. Okay, so how can you start to build empathy? Well, obviously, believe that somebody's experience is valid, and you get that, I'd say, by interacting with others. I mean, think about this. If you always hang out with or you interact with people who are like you, who are very similar to you, how can you possibly understand an alternative point of view? If you always hang out with people who are the same race as you, who have the same educational level as you, who speak the same language, who grew up in the same town. So this ties back to chapter 2 and intercultural communication. We need to put ourselves in situations where we interact with people who are different from us. And if we can't, we can engage in simulations. Sometimes, people want to understand what it might be like to experience the world if you are in a wheelchair. So what do you do? Well, spend some time in a wheelchair and realize how difficult it is to open doors, or possibly to reach light switches, or maybe even to use the stove. Okay, so that's what we mean by simulations. Another point has to do with empathy and ethics. So, sorry, I forgot to mention, here's my husband's phone again. Maybe that ding is a reminder I need to do something. If you want to figure out where you fall on the continuum of empathy, there is assessing your communication, your empathy quotient on page 129, and the scoring for this is on page 132. So empathy and ethics, we learn the golden rule, right? Do unto others as you would have them do unto you. So there is my good friend, and life is is terrible, so I make her my famous lentil soup, and I bring it over, and I feel really good about myself because I have said, oh, I'm doing unto her, as, you know, if when I'm really stressed and I don't feel like cooking, it would be great if people could bring me food. And she says, thank you so much, Marguerite, and you are the sixth person who has brought me soup. Or, I mean, she'd say it politely. Or she would say, oh, this is great, but I hate lentils. So instead of the golden rule, what if we do, I think it was called the platinum rule, do unto others as they would like to be done unto. I don't think that's awkward, right? Find out more about the person so what you do for them is in line with what they want to happen. And I'm not saying that, you know, your friend would love for you to bring over some cocaine, and so you should do that. You know, I'm not saying that you have to compromise your own ethics, your values, your morals, but the more you know about another person, the more you interact with them, the more ethically you can behave towards them. So it's interesting. There's this whole idea of, I can't remember what exactly it's called, where bystanders don't want to intervene because I think it's called the bystander effect. Goodness gracious, my husband should turn off his phone. That if you are with a bunch of people and something happen, you see someone stealing someone's pocketbook, and you're all thinking, someone else will deal with it. If you are a person who has more empathy, you are more likely to say, hey, stop that, or chase after that person. All right. And there's an increasing realization that people who have offended, whether it's minor or more major, if they can be taught to feel empathy, they're less likely to go out and commit theft again. One final thought here. A lot of times when people who feel empathy, they will say, I prefer the term empathetic. I'm an empathetic person. I think a lot of people don't like that because they hear the word pathetic, and they like to say I'm empathic. But I was a big Star Trek fan, and an empath is someone who can actually read people's emotions. That's in the popular press. And so I don't think any of us can look at someone and say, oh, you don't even have to say anything. I can tell, I can read your mind, and I know how you're feeling. But that's just me. So empathic, better would be empathetic. Okay. So check your understanding. Do you know what empathy is? Do you have an idea of how you can improve your own empathy? I'm really curious. Can you see yourself using perception checking or the pillow method? And explain, think about it. Why would you use one and not the other? Why wouldn't you use either of them? Why might you use both of them? And what questions do you have about this chapter? And I would say this chapter and chapter 3. So what I would like you to do is, once you're done, send me an email. If you can keep it within this class, which means you go to the messages and you're going to email me. If that's too challenging, just send me an email to my Tunx's email saying, a question I have about chapter 3 or 4 is, and if you have absolutely no questions, then I'd like you to say something like, the point that I really enjoyed or I found very useful about this chapter is. All right, and that is the end of chapter 4.